Hi. What I want to say right off the bat today with this video is I want to thank everyone who's been really helping me out and this channel. I've been getting a surge of subscribers and I really appreciate it. I'm thankful to everyone who's subscribed to my channel and starting to watch more of my videos. It gives me encouragement to keep on going. So again, thank you so much for subscribing. And you out there who are watching the videos, please subscribe also. I really appreciate it. It helps me out. It gives me this encouragement to keep on going. So what I want to talk about today is I want to revisit a topic that I had talked about a few weeks ago. I've been getting some emails and some questions about going back into that area of what I call low budget, no budget, micro budget, whatever you want to call it. It's independent filmmaking on whatever level you can do. So what I want to talk about here, again, I made my list over here. These topics about independent films made with no budget, low budget. What I want to talk about first is how to write, and I'm going to focus on this today, how to write your script so that it can be made on a micro budget or no budget. It's kind of difficult when you're first starting out. If you haven't written a lot of scripts, you may have the idea that you can write anything you want, like a writer who is writing to sell a script. That's two different things. When you're writing to make a script, one of the first things that I tell people is to take an inventory of what you have available that will make your script or give your script, your film, some production value, what I call low budget production value, something you can see on the screen. I always look for, and like I said, I'm in the middle of this process right now. Let me go off a little bit about what I'm working on. I'm working on some no budget scripts that could potentially be sold to Tubi and streamed on their site. There's a lot of new content appearing on there. They even have a special section where they started accepting more micro budget and no budget films. So that's something I want you to look into if you're interested in getting your film. And obviously you'd be interested if you're taking the time to make it, to have it seen by people. And Tubi is a great way to do that. Normally you go through a service, an aggregator, they call it, Film Hub. So that's two things you want to look at. Film Hub first, and then Film Hub actually is the very first thing you want to look at to find out what their requirements are. Because that will lead you to make your film available to more online streaming services. But I don't want to get into that because there's a lot of guys talking about getting on Film Hub, getting on Tubi and that kind of thing that are much more knowledgeable than I am. I want to stick to what I know. So again, back to what I'm talking about, writing your script for a low budget. So the first thing I tell people is, I'm going to repeat this again, take an inventory of the production value resources that you have available to you. For instance, my brother owns a deli. And that's something that I've written a script around. My other brother is what you call this is a position that they have in Virginia. He's an intensive, I gotta say it correctly. He's an intensive in-home counselor for troubled youth. Now, they don't have those type of positions in many states. I think Virginia is the only one that actually still does it, where you go into the home and you work with families with troubled kids, and most of the time if there's a troubled kid, there's a troubled family. So, but he has a lot of resources in that world. So him and I have written a script years ago about his work and what he does working with troubled youth. So that's one script, and I have another script that I've written with my brother who owns the deli. So again, those are just examples. Take an inventory of what you have available that could turn into an interesting story, and build your story around that. Years ago, I worked for a distributor out here in Los Angeles for a long time. I did a number of what I used to call in the days of VHS and DVD, product films. And those were films that, B-movies that would show up in rental stores like Blockbuster, Hollywood Video. A lot of you young people out there probably don't even know what that is, but they would have the A movies up on the higher shelves, like there were, or like eye level, and then they would have the B movies down lower. So I made a lot of those for independent distributors. And what the distributor would do is he would sometimes contact me and he would have resources. So I would use the resources that he had available to write a script around those resources. and, make a B movie that's, somewhat watchable. But again, on your own, you can find out what resources you have available, and you could create a film around those resources. Still with interesting characters, interesting story. I'm not saying, that's one thing too I want to say offhand too. I want to mention that just because you're making a low budget or no budget film doesn't mean you don't want to spend the time having interesting characters, with three-dimensional characters. You want to have, your story wants to have, obviously the beginning, middle, and end, the 3-act structure. So you want to write a good script, but you want to start with that thread of what I have available that will give my film production value. And the beauty of writing your own low-budget script, and that used to be one of the joys I had when I did works for hire as a writer-director, was that you're not worrying whether some gatekeeper is going to like your script and green light it, and you have to go through all these levels of producers and funding. And it was the joy of creating films for, just the creativity, the art of it. But you also knew in the back of your mind that this film would get distributed. It would be seen. And I think those days can make a comeback with the new streaming services that are available online. There's so much need for new original content online. It almost takes me back to the old days of VHS and DVD, where there was a big need, because distributors always need new content. They always need new product to sell. So that's the same thing nowadays. We're in that period of development with streaming, where they're always going to need more content. And you, as the independent filmmaker, you just need to find a way to make interesting, good content that can be distributed. So like I said, you want to find out what's required for whoever you decide to deliver your final product to before you make it. So that's why I mentioned Film Hub. You want to go through there and familiarize yourself with what the requirements are to get on a site like that. Because if you are on a site like that, then your product will be made available to all the distributors that come there looking for content. But again, you want to make sure you meet those requirements. You need to know what those requirements are in advance so that you can incorporate that into your planning of your no-budget script. Next, I want to talk about using a few locations. You don't want to go crazy with the locations. You may have that one principal location, which I call the production value location. Say, for instance, it's a bar, it's a nightclub, it's a barber shop. An interesting one-location film. There have been many of them. And they can be made again in this time and day and time because of the opportunity that the internet gives to independent filmmakers. But again, you want to make sure that you make the film correctly and you have the right you're shooting with the right production elements and quality and planning in mind even before the script stage. Next, I want to talk about using just a few characters. You don't want to get carried away having 15, 20 characters. You want to have 3 or 4 main characters. A story, I always tell people when I'm talking to new writers, a story can be made with 2 or 3 characters. If you think of something that happens in your life during a day, you may have a problem during the day, you may have something interesting happen, and it's probably involves only a few people. A good script can also be made which involves a small amount of interesting characters. So keep that in mind. You don't need a big, giant cast of characters to tell a good story. You just need some interesting characters. You need the interesting situation, beginning, middle, and end. I'll say that again. So you can tell a well thought out and planned story. Spend your time on the script, because a lot of independent filmmakers, they are anxious to shoot and they don't spend their time writing a good thought out script. Get information from people you trust. Let them read the script. Get some feedback and incorporate the good elements of that feedback. So spend your time in pre-production. Pre-production, I always tell people, pre-production costs you nothing. So spend the time in doing that. That's where I'm in right now with some of these projects. And I've been in pre-production for longer than I think I should have been. But I'm taking my time because I want to make something that is good and can get into the streaming services. But I don't want to just rush and throw something together. Because if you look at the site I mentioned earlier, Tubi, there's a lot of content there. People are making money there. Some people aren't, but a lot of people are making money on Tubi. But you just have to have interesting content, and you have to have, again, those production quality elements on the screen. You don't want to just shoot something in somebody's apartment where people are sitting down talking. You want to make a real script and turn that script into a real looking film so that it seems interesting and it's character driven. Ultimately, you're not going to try to make some sci-fi epic or action adventure with explosions and things that you can't do. You want to focus on a character driven story. I think that was my next topic. Character driven story. And if you think about it, this is another thing that I tell actors all the time when people call me up or write me an email and ask me about making independent films. I tell them, think about the characters. Even some of the big blockbusters that are well done, well made, have all the money in the world to be produced, and they're maybe special effects driven spectacles. But if you look down at the heart of it, it's the characters that you identify with. It's the characters that you care about. They end up making you care about the characters. I just finished watching the last season of the series on Netflix called You. Just finished the last couple episodes last night. And after it was over, you realize that the main character, the principal character, who you started to care about, if you like the show, you started to care about and be concerned about what happened to him, was a serial killer. And at the end, you started to realize that he deserves to be killed or go to jail for all the things that he's done during the 5-year run of the series. But they had an interesting character. They never had a lot of characters in the show, but mostly it was interesting characters and had backstories. Obviously, there was good writing. Obviously, there were good production value. But at the heart of it was the characters that you cared about. And you wanted to see what happened next. They were interesting, multi-dimensional characters. And so that's what you need to write. That can be easily done if you take the time and effort into writing your micro-budget, no-budget script and creating characters that people can care about. People want to follow. People want to identify with. People want to see what's going to happen to them. It's always about the characters. Any television series that's well done, you're going to care about the characters. And what I always say, another thing I always say, is that characters you care about can be taken out of that context. And for instance, a hospital show. There's some maybe 3 or 4 great characters that you care about. They can be taken out of that hospital environment and put to work in a fire station, a post office, a restaurant. It doesn't matter what the world these interesting characters are living in. It's that these characters are interesting. They get your attention. They make you want to know more about them. They make you interested in seeing what their life is outside of the job, where they live, who their friends are, how they grew up. So again, make sure you're writing interesting characters, even if you're doing a micro-budget or no-budget project. Next is make it production-friendly locations. You want to have locations that you can use, especially if you don't have money to pay for locations, that you can freely use, that you'll have access to. Don't write stuff that you don't have access to. I mean, over the years, I've gotten scripts where people want to literally send me scripts where there's a car chase on Hollywood Boulevard or there's a shootout in LAX airport. Don't be ridiculous. If you're doing a low-budget project, think about locations and resources that you can really get. Make it viable, something that you will be able to produce. And I talked a little bit about release already on Tubi. But again, I just want to wrap up with what I talked about again. When you're writing for a low budget, no budget film, have that in mind. Take that inventory of your resources and let your imagination flow from there. Ask that question. What if this happened? What if that happened? So it's not impossible to write a good low budget or no budget script because it has been done many times. I've even written some that I think were really well done scripts. If you want to make sure that it's something you can really produce, because again, when you're starting out and if you're established and you want to do something that's freeing, that takes you back to that joy you had when you originally started filmmaking, or you thought about starting filmmaking. You can make a small, interesting production that happens in a park, that happens you'll see a lot in the woods in the cabin, but you maybe want to stay away from that because that's been overdone to death. But that can happen in one interesting location. There can really be a story. But it requires thought. It requires planning. And another thing I want to say before I wrap up, outlining. You can't go wrong if you outline your script. A lot of times I've worked with writers who I collaborate with, and one of the first questions I try to ease into is how do they prepare? How do they start their writing? Are they willing to do what I call a sentence outline? You can look that up to find out more details about it. A sentence outline of Act 1, Act 2, and Act 3. The reason I love sentence outlines is because you can see where the script and the idea is going in 1 page or 2 pages at the most. Act 1, Act 2, and Act 3. One sentence to represent each scene in those 3 acts. And you can get a global view or a skeleton, as I say, of where your story is going before you sit there and start writing dialogue. A lot of writers, independent filmmaker writers, want to jump right in and start writing. Oh, I've got this great idea and there's some great dialogue and blah, 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 blah. They want to jump right into the dialogue or the action or whatever. You need to know where you're going. You need to be able to plan in twists and turns. You need to make each act interesting. You need to make each scene interesting, and it's moving the story forward with a purpose. So that 3-act structure, sentence outline, and writing for low-budget screenplays or low-budget production is something that is all part of the pre-production time. And again, in closing, I want to say that pre-production time costs you nothing. It just takes time, and it takes the work and the effort to put into it. So if you're seriously considering that, don't rush into production because you have this fancy new camera. You want to have a product that you can be proud of. And it all starts with the script. And next video, I'm probably going to talk about finding and working with actors once you have that script that you think could be a winner for a no-budget production. So again, thank you. Please continue to subscribe to my channel and continue to send me in those questions. I love to see questions down in the comments, and I try to get to them all. And you'll also see my email down there too, where you can directly, a lot of people have been sending me email, and I'm really thankful for that. I love to talk about this stuff, as you can tell. Not trying to sell you anything. I just want to share my knowledge and continue to make content that gives my knowledge away so that you can go out there and make better films and embody the joy of independent filmmaking. Thank you. I'll see you in the next one.